The first thing I noticed was that someone else was sitting in my chair. Not just any chair. My chair. The one at the head of the conference table where I had spent 4 years leading the firm's biggest client meetings. The leather was worn exactly where my arms used to rest. I knew every scratch on that table, every mark on those walls. And the person sitting there was my father's new wife's son. He leaned back casually, scrolling through his phone like he had always been there. His designer suit looked brand new. My father cleared his throat and slid a single sheet of paper across the polished surface toward me without making eye contact. "Effective immediately," he said flatly. "Your position at the company has been terminated." The room went completely silent. I looked down at the paper. My name. My job title. A termination notice. Sabrina, my father's wife of 6 months, sat beside him with her hands folded neatly on the table. She wasn't trying to hide her satisfaction. "My name is Lydia Carrington." That morning my father fired me to give my career to a man I barely knew. They thought I would disappear quietly. They were wrong. 8 years earlier, my father's company was barely surviving. He had started it after his divorce from my mother, working out of a cramped office with second-hand furniture. For the first 2 years it was just the two of us. He handled the big ideas. I handled everything else. I brought in our first major client during my 3rd month, a manufacturing company that needed operations consulting. I spent 3 weeks preparing the proposal, researching their industry, and learning their challenges deeply. Their CEO called my father afterward and said, "Wherever you found her, keep her." Then I brought in the second client. Then the third. I built our internal systems from scratch, created proposal templates, trained junior staff, and negotiated contracts late into the night. I answered client emails on weekends without complaint. By the time I was promoted to managing director, most of our biggest clients didn't call my father anymore. They called me. I had given this company 8 years of my life and poured everything I had into building something real. That, I later came to understand, was exactly what made me dangerous to the people about to walk through the door. 3 months before I was fired, my father married Sabrina. She was polished, confident, and skilled at appearing warm while being entirely calculating. I tried to like her genuinely, but something about the way she studied our office during her first visit made me uneasy. Her eyes moved from desk to desk like she was already rearranging things in her mind. 2 weeks after the wedding, she brought her son Logan into the company. Logan was 31 years old. His background consisted of 2 years at a small marketing agency and one failed startup that lasted 8 months. He had no experience in consulting, no industry relationships, and no understanding of how our clients operated. But he arrived on his first day in an expensive suit and announced to staff that he planned to modernize operations. Within his first week, he had suggested changes to 3 active client contracts that violated agreements we had carefully built over years. I stayed late fixing the damage quietly, telling myself I was protecting the company. I didn't yet understand I was protecting the very people already planning to take everything from me. 2 weeks before I was fired, I stayed late finishing a quarterly report. The office was mostly empty. I was the only one on the executive floor, or so I thought. Walking past the conference room toward the kitchen, I heard Sabrina's voice drifting through the slightly open door. "She's too comfortable here," she said. I stopped immediately, my hand against the wall. My father's voice followed, quieter but still clear. "She built half of this company." "That's exactly the problem," Sabrina replied without hesitation. "Logan needs full authority. As long as Lydia is here, the staff listens to her. The clients trust her. He simply cannot lead while she is still in the room." A long silence followed. Then my father said 8 words that changed everything. "You're right. We'll handle it next week." I stood frozen in that hallway for a long time. Heart pounding. Coffee forgotten entirely on the counter behind me. I had walked into that office as managing director that morning. I walked away from that hallway knowing I already wasn't. The only question remaining was what I was going to do with what I had just learned. The actual firing happened on a Tuesday morning. My father called a brief meeting, just him, Sabrina, and me. Logan was already in the conference room when I arrived, relaxed in my chair, phone in hand. My father slid the termination letter across the table. I read it once, then set it down carefully. "I don't understand," I said, even though I understood completely. He used words like restructuring and fresh leadership vision. He never mentioned family, even though that was the only real reason sitting across the table from me. I packed my desk slowly and quietly. No dramatic words. No tears. No raised voice. As I carried my box to the elevator, Logan appeared in the hallway. "Good luck out there," he said with a smirk. I turned and looked at him calmly. "Take good care of my clients," I said. He laughed. "They're the company's clients now." I smiled and stepped into the elevator. He was technically right. They were the company's clients on paper. But every single one of them had my personal number saved in their phones. And that was a detail Logan had completely failed to consider. The first 3 days after being fired, I did nothing. I sat in my apartment, slept too much, and replayed the same memory over and over. My father sliding that paper across the table without looking at me. On the 4th day, my phone rang. It was Mr. Bennett, CEO of Bennett Industries. His company had been our client for 6 years and represented nearly 18% of the firm's annual revenue. I had personally managed every contract renewal, every project update, and every difficult negotiation on their behalf. "I heard you're no longer with the firm," he said. "That's correct," I answered. A thoughtful pause followed. "I want to ask you something honestly," he said. "If you were to start something new on your own, would you let me know?" I sat up straight on my couch. My heart was beating faster than it had in days. "Yes," I said quietly. "I will." I hung up and sat completely still for a moment. Then I opened my laptop and started writing a business plan. The fear was real. But so was something else. A quiet certainty that had been missing for a very long time. 3 weeks after losing my job, I signed a lease on the smallest office space in the building. It was on the 4th floor of an older building downtown. The carpet was outdated. The windows needed cleaning. There was room for 2 desks and not much else. I didn't care. I set up my personal laptop and a second-hand monitor. I printed my company name on a single sheet of paper and taped it to the door. Carrington Consulting Group. The next day my phone rang. It was Priya, one of my most trusted colleagues from the old firm. She had been there 5 years and helped manage 3 of our largest accounts personally. "I heard you set up an office," she said. "Are you really doing this?" "Yes," I told her. "Then I quit this morning," she said simply. "When do I start?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. We sat across from each other in that tiny room, 2 women, 1 laptop, building something from nothing. I was genuinely terrified. But I had never felt more certain of anything in my life. Within 2 weeks of opening, the attacks began. I had expected my father to be upset, maybe angry. What I hadn't prepared for was how organized the retaliation would be. Logan called mutual contacts across the industry, claiming I had been let go due to erratic behavior and performance problems. He told at least 2 clients I had attempted to take confidential files when I left. My father spread a quieter version. He suggested I had left over a personal dispute and was going through a difficult time. The tone made me sound unstable and unreliable. Some clients stopped returning my calls. 2 people I had known professionally for years became unavailable when I reached out. It hurt more than I expected. But I didn't respond publicly or ask anyone to take sides. Instead, I kept my head down, focused on clients still talking to me, and delivered excellent work every single time. I had learned something important over 8 years in this business. Reputations built on lies always crack. The truth doesn't need announcing. It simply needs to be demonstrated quietly and consistently until it becomes impossible to dispute. 6 weeks after opening Carrington Consulting Group, Mr. Bennett called again. He asked me to meet him at a quiet restaurant near his office. I arrived early and ordered water. I was nervous in a way I hadn't expected. His account could give my company real momentum, or confirm I had made a terrible mistake. He arrived exactly on time. We talked briefly about the industry. He asked about my team and my plans. Then he reached into his briefcase and slid a folder across the table. Inside was a consulting agreement. Already drafted. Already signed on his end. "I've worked with you for 6 years," he said simply. "Not with the firm. With you. I have no interest in starting over with someone who doesn't understand our business." My hands were steady as I picked up the pen. My voice was calm when I said thank you. But the moment I reached my car and closed the door, I pressed my forehead against the steering wheel and let myself breathe. We had our first real client, and it was bigger than anything I had let myself hope for when I taped that company name to the door. Word travels fast in a small industry. Within a week of Bennett Industries signing with us, Priya passed along something that made me set down my coffee. Logan had stormed into my father's office furious. "How did she get Bennett Industries?" he demanded. My father had studied him for a long moment before answering. "Because she built that relationship," he said. "She landed them. She kept them year after year." According to Priya, the room went completely quiet after that. Because it wasn't just about one lost account. It was the moment the truth became impossible to ignore. The clients leaving weren't going to a competitor. They were going to one specific person who had spent years building trust that no title could transfer. Logan had nothing to fall back on. No real history with these people. No credibility earned through genuine work. And my father, for the first time since the morning he fired me, appeared to understand the full size of what he had done. Not just the business error. The deeper one. The kind that doesn't get fixed with a restructuring announcement or a new organizational chart. I didn't chase anyone. Priya and I agreed on that from the very beginning. We would not pressure former clients, speak negatively about the old firm, or ask anyone to take sides. We would simply do excellent work, stay available, and let people decide for themselves. Over the next 2 months, something quiet and steady began to happen. Calls came in the evenings. Emails arrived just before midnight. Always private. Always careful. "Are you taking on new accounts? I heard you started something. Is there room for us? Our team has been uncomfortable since the transition. We'd like to explore options." I answered each one honestly. I explained our capacity. I set clear expectations and never promised anything I couldn't deliver. And one by one, accounts started moving. Not because I had pressured anyone or spread rumors. Contracts simply ended, and when they did, clients made their own free choices about where to go. They chose me. Priya and I were working 16-hour days by the end of those 2 months. But we were smiling through most of them, because something genuinely real was finally growing in that small 4th-floor office. While we gained steady ground, Logan was actively damaging his own position. We heard about it through an industry contact with nothing to gain from either side. Logan had decided to prove himself by restructuring one of the old firm's longest-standing contracts. The client was a logistics company that had worked with my father for nearly 9 years. Logan pushed aggressive new pricing and removed key service provisions the client had relied on for years, without consulting them, without reviewing the account history, without asking anyone who actually understood the relationship. The client gave 2 weeks' notice and walked. Their operations director called me that same afternoon. He explained what had happened and asked if we had capacity to bring them on. We did. Priya and I worked through the entire weekend on a tailored proposal. Monday morning we had a signed agreement on the table. 3rd major client. 8 weeks. But beyond the win, it confirmed what I had believed from day one. Logan wasn't simply underqualified for the role. He was steadily dismantling the very thing he had been given, and doing it with full confidence that he knew exactly what he was doing. By the end of our 5th month, things looked completely different from that first cramped room. We had moved into a larger space, modest but genuinely professional. 3 full-time employees sat at proper desks with proper equipment. 7 active client accounts, including 2 of the most significant in our industry segment. Our systems were organized and clean from the start because I had built systems before and knew exactly what to improve. Our proposals were honest and detailed. Our reporting was clear. Our response time was fast every single time. Clients notice without being prompted. "This is the most organized firm we've ever worked with," one operations manager told me during a routine check-in call. I thanked her and wrote it down. Not for the compliment, but because it told me what was working and I intended to keep building on every part of it. Priya managed client relationships with a steady confidence that made people feel genuinely looked after. Our newest hire, a sharp young analyst named Felix, brought precision and energy that made the whole team stronger. We were no longer surviving. We were building something truly worth being proud of. My father appeared outside my office on a Wednesday evening in our 6th month. I saw him through the glass door as I was shutting down my computer. He stood in the hallway wearing his coat, looking older than I remembered. More worn. Like the months had taken something from him that he hadn't been prepared to lose. I opened the door. We stood quietly for a moment. "You're hurting the company," he finally said. I kept my voice level. "I'm running a business. Lydia." He paused. "Those were our clients." I looked at him directly. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. Simply with honesty. "They were my relationships," I said. "I built them. I maintained them through years of evenings and weekends. The company name was just the letterhead." He had nothing to say to that. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not quite guilt, but dangerously close to it. He stood there a few more seconds. Then he nodded once, almost to himself, and walked away. I watched him go. Then I turned off the lights, locked the door, and went home to rest. Tomorrow would be a full day. From what Priya heard through her contacts, Sabrina did not respond to the losses calmly. She blamed Logan first, then the clients for being disloyal, then landed on blaming me for deliberate sabotage of a family business. She pushed my father hard to take legal action. Specifically, a lawsuit claiming I had stolen client relationships belonging to the company. He consulted their lawyers. The lawyers came back with an answer she clearly didn't want. I had not violated any non-compete. The clause in my original contract was too narrow in scope. I had removed no confidential materials and had never contacted a single client while still employed. The clients had ended their contracts freely and chosen where to go next on their own. There was nothing to file. Sabrina apparently spent the better part of a week pushing for another angle, another way to bring me back under their control. The lawyers held firm. No court would penalize someone for being trusted more than the people who had replaced her. The clients had exercised a freedom that neither Sabrina nor Logan had ever thought to factor into their plans. 3 weeks after my father's evening visit, I received an unexpected message. It came from Arthur, who worked in the old firm's finance department. We had always been friendly without being particularly close. His message was brief, asking for a private conversation. We met for coffee the next morning. He looked uneasy from the moment he sat down, glancing toward the door more than once. "I want you to know something," he said quietly. "Not to cause problems. Just because I think you deserve to know what's actually happening over there." He told me Logan had been making increasingly desperate decisions over the past 2 months, driven by the pressure of watching accounts leave. He had promised 2 major prospects service capabilities the firm didn't have. He was also understaffing existing accounts to cut costs, while reporting inflated performance numbers to the partners. "It's going to catch up with him," Arthur said. "I don't know exactly when, but it won't be a quiet event when it does." I thanked him sincerely and drove back to the office. I didn't celebrate what I had heard. I simply kept working because the work was what mattered. 2 weeks after my coffee with Arthur, I received a call from Harwood Global. They were an international firm with operations across 4 continents. They had been a client of my father's company for over a decade. I had worked on their account in my early years before it moved to a senior partner as my responsibilities grew. Their CEO, a sharp and direct woman named Patricia, reached out through a mutual contact. She said her leadership team had watched the changes at the old firm with growing unease. 3 of her own department heads had personally recommended they speak with me before making any decisions. She asked if I would fly out and meet with them. I said yes before she finished asking. I spent 5 days preparing with complete focus. I reviewed everything available about Harwood's operations. I built 3 tailored proposals across different service areas. I prepared an honest answer for every difficult question I could anticipate. Priya stayed up with me until midnight the night before my flight. "You're ready," she said. I nodded and tried hard to believe it. I spent most of the flight staring out the window thinking. The meeting with Patricia's team lasted just over 3 hours. 8 people sat across from me in a top-floor conference room, each with detailed questions about their specific part of the business. The questions were technical and precise, leaving no room for vague answers. I answered everyone honestly. When I didn't have an exact figure, I said so and explained how I would get it. When a proposal needed adjustment, I acknowledged it immediately and offered a clear solution without stalling. By the second hour, something in the room had shifted. People leaned forward instead of back. Side conversations had stopped. Patricia watched everything quietly from the head of the table. At the end of hour 3, she folded her hands. Harwood doesn't change long-term relationships lightly, she said. But we value genuine competence and honest dealing above everything else. I believe we found both today. She extended her hand. I shook it. The contract they signed that afternoon was the largest of my career. Bigger than anything I had ever brought to my father's firm. I called Priya from the airport. We stayed on the line for a long time without saying very much at all. Losing Harwood Global was not a quiet event for the old firm. Word moved through the industry quickly. When a firm that size ends a decade-long relationship and immediately signs elsewhere, the industry notices and starts asking questions. My father received calls from investors within 48 hours. They asked pointed questions about leadership stability, client retention figures, and who exactly was running decisions and on what basis. Logan had no satisfying answers. He had spent months projecting confident leadership while quietly mismanaging accounts and overpromising to prospects. Those gaps could no longer be hidden behind polished language. 2 junior employees handed in resignations the week after the Harwood news spread. Both letters cited uncertainty about the company's direction, which was a careful way of saying they no longer trusted what was happening around them. My father called an emergency leadership meeting. Sabrina attended and reportedly spent most of it pointing blame at outside forces. Market shifts, disloyal clients, competitive interference. No one at that table mentioned the most obvious explanation, that the person who had built the firm's client relationships was no longer there to keep them. Sabrina called a family dinner. That was exactly how she framed the message she sent through my father. A family dinner. As though sitting around a table together could somehow undo months of deliberate damage. I almost didn't go. Priya told me plainly that I didn't know anyone that table, and she was right. But something in me needed to be present for whatever came next. We sat at a private table in a restaurant my father used to take me to when I was a child. Logan sat beside his mother with his arms crossed, carrying the cold resentment of someone who knows they're wrong but refuses to say so out loud. Sabrina wasted no time. You have deliberately destroyed what your father spent years building, she said, looking straight at me. I set down my water glass. You destroyed it, I replied, keeping my voice completely level. The moment you fired the person who was actually running it. Nobody spoke. My father stared at the table. Logan stared at the wall. Sabrina opened her mouth and then closed it. I finished my meal quietly, said goodnight, and left. Logan's final attempt to stabilize the firm was the most damaging thing he could have done. Desperate to replace the accounts that had walked away, he assembled a bid for a large government-adjacent contract, the kind requiring certified teams, documented processes, and verified capabilities the firm simply did not have. He submitted it anyway. He promised delivery timelines that were impossible. He listed qualifications the firm hadn't held in years. He signed off on capability claims that were misleading at best. The evaluation committee flagged the inconsistencies and requested supporting documentation. Logan's team scrambled for 2 weeks looking for workarounds that didn't exist. The bid was formally rejected. And because the committee had flagged the issues in writing as an official record, the details spread across the industry network within days. This was now a public failure. Not simply a missed contract, but a reputational event people were openly discussing. 2 clients who had stayed through everything began quietly exploring their options the following week. My phone received 2 new inquiries that same Friday afternoon. I forwarded both to Priya and asked her to set up calls for Monday morning. The resignations came steadily after that. Not all at once. More like water finding cracks in a wall. First 1, then 2, then a quiet stream that became impossible to reverse. 4 senior employees left the old firm within 6 weeks of the failed bid. People who had been loyal through genuinely difficult years. People who had stayed patient even as Logan's leadership made things increasingly uncomfortable. But there is a real difference between uncomfortable and unsustainable. They had finally reached that line. 3 of them contacted me directly. Not to make a statement, simply because they were looking for something stable, well-run, and genuinely purposeful. I spoke honestly with each of them about where we were and where we were headed. I made no promises I couldn't keep and offered fair roles with real responsibility. 2 of them accepted. The Carrington Consulting team now felt like something I had only ever allowed myself to imagine quietly. Experienced. Motivated. Completely aligned. We held a small team lunch that Friday. No speeches. No announcements. Just good people who had chosen to build something real together. My father came to my office again, but this time was different from every visit before. He didn't call ahead. He simply arrived one Thursday afternoon and asked the front desk if I was available. Priya texted me. "Your dad is here. He looks different." I walked out to meet him. He was standing by the window looking down at the street. He had lost weight since I last saw him. The weariness I had noticed before had deepened into something that looked much closer to grief. "Do you have a few minutes?" he asked. I nodded and brought him into my office. He was quiet for a long time after sitting down. Then he said, "I made the worst mistake of my career. And we both know it had nothing to do with business." I didn't agree aloud. But I didn't argue. I let someone else's ambition become more important than what I actually knew to be true, he said quietly. Then he looked directly at me. "I'm sorry, Lydia." The words landed simply between us. I believed he meant every one of them. But even genuine sorrow cannot undo 8 months of damage done to someone who deserved far better. 14 months after I was fired, my father's company was sold. Not the way businesses are sold when they're thriving. It was a distressed acquisition by a larger regional firm that purchased the remaining contracts and the office lease. The name vanished. The brand my father had spent over a decade building was absorbed without a trace. Logan was not offered a position by the acquiring firm. He left the industry quietly. His professional profiles went inactive. Nobody I knew had heard from him since. Sabrina's name disappeared from any professional context within weeks of the sale. And my father, for the first time I could remember, had nothing left to run. I learned about the sale through an industry newsletter before he called. He reached out 2 days later, not to explain himself or ask anything, simply to say he had wanted me to hear it from him directly that it was over. I thanked him. We stayed on the line a few seconds longer than the conversation required. Then we said goodbye. I sat at my desk for a long time after that, not working, just thinking about what it truly means to build something and lose it, and what it means to build something and keep it. 3 years after my father slid that termination letter across the table, I stood at the window of our new headquarters watching the city below. We had moved twice since the 4th-floor office with the outdated carpet. Carrington Consulting Group now occupied a full floor in a modern building downtown. 18 employees, 31 active accounts. A reputation built one honest engagement at a time. Mr. Bennett's team had sent a gift when we moved. A framed note from his CEO. "Here's to the people who prove that how you treat others is the only strategy that truly lasts." I had hung it in our main conference room where every visiting client could read it. Priya was now a partner. Felix had been promoted twice. The team we had built was exactly the kind of place people stayed and grew within for the long term. My father and I spoke occasionally. Not often. The relationship was still finding its shape, and I was willing to let that take all the time it needed. But standing at that window on a quiet Friday evening, I understood something completely. I hadn't won by beating anyone. I had won by refusing to disappear when someone decided I was finished. And that, it turned out, had always been enough.